This is an oral history interview with Miss Helen Conway and Miss Isabelle Conway at 497 Center Street, Newton Corner, Massachusetts. This interview is conducted as part of a project of the Newton Free Library and the Jackson Homestead. The general subject areas we will be covering include the history of Newton since 1926. This is Elizabeth Newman speaking. I will start with Isabelle Conway, asking her when her family came to Newton and why.
We came to Newton in June 1926. We had been separated on account of my father's death in Cleveland, Ohio, of the influenza, 1918.
Oh, really?
And my mother kept my youngest brother, William, and she came to Newton about 4 years or 5 years before that time, 1926, and worked as a cook housekeeper in Newton Center for the Field family. The Fields were Betty Fields, who was a movie star, grandparents, and my mother was the cook and housekeeper. And Helen and I, my sister Helen and I, came to Brookline and worked as mother's helpers and went to Brookline High from New Brunswick, Canada, where we had been living with my uncles and aunt and grandmother. So my mother wanted to get the family together, and we hired an apartment, sublet an apartment at 299 Center Street in 1926. That was for my mother, my sister, and my brother and I. My older brother, Charles, stayed in New Brunswick until he finished grammar school, and then came up and joined us. And we settled there for 6 years. After that, we moved to 269 Church Street and lived in the ground floor apartment across from the Y in the house of Carl Corkum. And we had the ground floor, and they lived upstairs. And we stayed there for 30 years until the Mass Pike came, took the house. Then we moved to, my mother had died in the meantime, and we moved to 11 Linder Terrace. And we were there for 25 years. Then we moved to 497 Center Street because we were evicted from that apartment on account of the owner having illegal apartments in that house and the one next door to it. And he didn't want to keep on renting the apartments and do the things that were required by law. So he sold the two houses, and we moved here.
Very good.
You know, you have the whole story.
Quite a story of a family. In order to make it a little bit easier for us to understand, would you go through the children in your family who had an older brother?
No.
No.
I am the oldest.
You're the oldest.
And Helen is next. Then Charles. he was the older of the boys.
I see. Mm-hmm.
And then William. Charles lived at Oak Hill Park. He was a veteran, and he was in one of the new houses that they built at Oak Hill Park. He has since died. He's been dead now about 3 years. But his wife still lives there, and he had 6 children, and they're scattered all around. And William lives in Connecticut. He had 3 children, and he and his wife are living in Connecticut.
Very good. Did your mother ever work before she was married or any? Well,
I think maybe she did. It strikes me that when you're younger, you don't pay attention to these things.
I know.
Now I wish that we knew something about our family, about my father's family. We do not know anything except my grandparents and from there. But where did they come from? We don't know whether they were Irish, and we don't know whether they lived in this country for 2 generations, 3 generations. We don't know anything about them. But my mother came from New Brunswick, Canada, and she came to an aunt in Dorchester. And she was a child's nurse. We had pictures, I don't know whether we still have them now, of her with a uniform and a cap. Mm-hmm. And she was a child's nurse in Dorchester. And met my father, who was going to, as it was called in those days, Boston Tech. It moved across the river and became Massachusetts Institute of Technology.
That's interesting.
And my father graduated in 1904 from Boston Tech. And in those days, they used to have down east dances. There were a lot of people here from New Brunswick and Nova Scotia, and most of them were domestics. But they met at this down east dance. College boy went to the dance and met my mother. So we lived in Framingham when I was born. But I was born in Boston, but we lived in Framingham. And I have a faint memory that my mother worked in a laundry. Mm. That's all I can remember. Mm-hmm. But after she was married, she didn't work. And my father worked for the Denison Manufacturing Company. Mm. And the reason we went to Cleveland during the war, he wanted a better job. He was an engineer, and he and another man invented a machine for stringing tags, which they used to have at the Denison. And, of course, it belonged to the company.
Yes.
They had no right to it and didn't make anything on it except their regular day's pay. Mm-hmm. So he went to Cleveland to get a better job in 1916. And we went out there. We were there 2 years before he died of the flu.
Mm-hmm. And then your mother took the job as a cook?
No, well, she took that a couple of years
afterwards.
We came to Framingham, and then we went to New Brunswick, Canada, and my mother was there for a year. Uh-huh. And then she came here to Newton because we had friends on Baldwin Street that used to live on the same street that we lived in Framingham. Uh-huh. So my mother came to the Reinhardts on Baldwin Street and looked for a job, and she didn't get a very good job because she had a small boy that she was taking care of, my brother William. Mm-hmm. But they lived in Newton. She did work in Newton Center, and when she was through there, then we did get together and start a home of our own.
Very good. Could you tell me anything about her routine at home before she started to work, or were you too young to really remember much?
No, my
Just
father.
taking care of her kids.
My father died when I was 11. We went to Cleveland. I was 9. But she just was a housewife and took care of 5 children.
Made wonderful donuts.
And my father was a good carpenter and plumber and all those things. In our house in Framingham, he built 2 rooms on upstairs, and they rented the upstairs part, and we lived downstairs. And but no, she just was a housewife, and she had 5 children. We lost a little girl out in Cleveland before my father died, and that's all she did.
So she spent quite a bit of time with the family.
Oh yes.
And did your father have any time with you as children? Did you have any vacations?
Oh, I don't know. He was always.
He was too busy, I guess.
Well,
working.
when I remember 2 vacations. Of course, he didn't get paid for vacation. I remember that. My mother saying that. But we went to New Brunswick, down to my grandmother's, and she had 5 brothers. There were 4 brothers around and 1 sister. And
I'll show her the picture.
yeah, and
I saw the boat.
she, while we were there, he put in water in my grandmother's house.
That was quite an achievement.
Yeah. So they had running water. One of the first ones around the neighborhood. It's a small town in New Brunswick. And we went down on the boat to St. John, and then I guess we probably took the train from there to my grandmother's. And that's one vacation that I remember my father being with us. Other than that, I think we just didn't have any vacations when we were living in Framingham. It just, my father didn't take time off because he wasn't paid. And that's about all I can...
Do you know the name of the town in New Brunswick?
Oh, yes. Blackville. I was there for three years going to school.
Blackville?
Blackville.
Blackville.
And it is 25 miles north of Newcastle and 80 miles, no, that's south of, no, wait a minute. It's 80 miles south of Fredericton, which is the capital of New Brunswick, and Newcastle is 25 miles further north. And it's on the Miramichi River, which is noted for salmon. Anything else?
Nice place.
Yes. Yeah. A lovely place for kids.
I never thought of that, but I think that must be me on Papa's lap.
We're now looking at a picture.
This is my father
With a motorcycle.
with the motorcycle that he built.
Oh, with the motorcycle that your father built. Isn't that something?
Yeah.
And
And
this
this
is young Helen?
I think
Yes.
there we are on the boat going to New Brunswick. At that time they had a boat.
That went to St. John, New Brunswick.
And here we are. Here's my mother and my aunt, who's 94, up in Canada now. And there's Isabelle, me.
That must
Must
be
be
Charles.
And my little brother wasn't born yet. Oh, Dolly is Dolly there.
That's a nice picture.
Here's Charles, and her name was Ethel, but we called her Dolly. Because when she came out from the hospital, Charles called her Dolly.
Well, she was a sweet-looking child.
Yeah.
I'm not gonna get you.
Oh, here's some more old.
There's Dolly in her carriage. And here's Isabelle and I sitting on our porch out in Framingham.
With great big hair ribbons.
Yeah,
Isn't that
there we
fun?
are with my little brother.
And
And
smiling.
here's another one of Charles.
Uh-huh.
We used to have him on the rug, naked. You know, when they used to take,
And I was saying to Helen today that,
I don't know what's becoming him.
no,
Okay, well, that shows our family.
Well, that's
You
fun.
saw my
Thank you.
mother. Picture my mother. She was nice of her. Isabelle looks like my mother, and I look like my father.
Uh-huh.
There she is.
She was a pretty lady.
She was.
She was
Ethel.
a pretty lady.
She had more boyfriends after.
Yeah.
She came up to help my mother.
when she'd be having a baby, and she went to a lady who taught dressmaking,
Oh,
sewing.
uh-huh.
And my aunt, while she was staying with us, went, of course she was about 16 then, and I was 7 or 8. So it was 13 years between she and I, and there was about 13 years between my mother and her. My mother was the oldest of 7, and she was the youngest.
Oh, so
So
widespread.
we're very close. It's 13 years.
That's
between us.
nice.
I'm 80 today, this year.
Uh-huh, uh-huh. Now, when you were a child, what kind of games did you play? Do you remember?
Oh,
Anything
yes, we
special?
used to have quite a nice...
Skip rope.
We skipped rope, and we used to have a nice group of kids. There were Italians and Irish and us. My father was Irish. And we used to play, like relievo and things like that. We had a nice light out at the corner. We lived on this corner, and then there was a vacant field here, and there was a light there. We used to play out there in the evenings, the long evenings. We used to play hide and seek, and we used to play relievo and games like that, and jump rope, and hopscotch.
And did your family see much of the other neighbors?
Oh, yes.
Did they go back and forth?
They were very, very nice. We had an old friend across the street, Mrs. Kelly, and we were very friendly. And we've been back to see them, in the last, about 30 or 40 years ago. And Helen and I went to kindergarten. The Denison Manufacturing Company provided a kindergarten for their workers, employees, children. And we went to, it was about, it was more than a mile from our house, but we used to walk. And when I got through, they had 2 teachers, and I finished, and then my mother made me go the second year to walk down and back with Helen. So when we went into school, we both were in the first grade, although I was a year and a half older than she. And then there was a small school near us, the Lokerville School, and it only went to the 4th grade. And I had just gone into it in September when we moved to Cleveland. And that was that. So I went to school 2 years in Cleveland, Lakewood, Ohio. And then I went to New Brunswick and went 3 years to grammar school there.
I had typhoid fever up there. Isabelle caught up.
Yeah, I got ahead of her
She got ahead of me.
because we had been together all the time. Because my mother made me go to kindergarten 2 years. But I can't remember much about kindergarten except that we had a good time.
I think that's what kindergarten's for.
Yeah.
Were you active in your church, or were any of your family active?
We never went to church until we went to Cleveland, our Sunday school. My father was a Catholic, and his mother and father were living there in Framingham. So we just didn't go anywhere. My mother was a Protestant. So when we went to Cleveland, my father joined the Presbyterian Church, and we went to Sunday school, and we've been going ever since.
Which church do you go to?
We go to Elliott,
Aha.
and
You know anybody there?
Edna Akoff is a neighbor of ours.
oh yes, that's right. Edna, we've been friendly with the Acups
Dad
for a long
right
time.
now.
Yes.
She's laid up.
She's a lovely lady.
But we've been active in church ever since.
Mm-hmm. Do you remember, did your family ever have a car?
No.
No, okay. Do you remember when you first got a refrigerator?
Well, we must have had a refrigerator in Framingham.
You mean electric?
Yes.
Oh, electric.
Oh,
no,
no.
we didn't have an electric refrigerator
Down here
until
on Church Street.
must have been 1930 or 1932.
Well, I suspect that was very common, wasn't it? You used an ice
Because
box.
when we went to Church Street, we had an ice box. And that was 32. So we probably didn't have one until 34 or 35.
Uh-huh. Do you remember when you got a first radio?
Not very, oh yes, we had a radio.
Upstairs in,
No, we had a radio about 1927.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
And when did you get a television set? No?
Oh,
that's probably when we got the refrigerator.
I don't know. No, we didn't have a
We didn't have to get one early. We didn't get one early.
Oh gosh, I don't know when it was.
In the 30s.
I remember my
Maybe the 40s.
brother had one years before we did. He had 5 or 6 kids about that time, 4 or 5 children, and he had a television, but I don't think we had one till
Early 40s, probably.
yeah, the early 40s. We didn't have one early.
Well, I think that was early.
Or was it?
Yeah.
Well, maybe it was 50.
Because
After the World War, it wasn't a big popular
I
after
can't
the war.
remember that.
well,
Well, it
don't,
must have been 50 then,
Yeah, it must have been 50.
because it wasn't when they first came out.
No, we were always slow.
so you probably don't have any special memories about World War One.
No,
You
except
probably
that I
were young.
remember my father had died 2 days before, on the 9th of November. That was the false armistice. And the real one was the 11th. And my grandparents came from Framingham to the funeral, and I was to meet them with a lady, a friend, that took me in because I knew my grandparents, and all hell broke loose. It was the armistice, and we never even got to the station, arrived at the station, and my grandparents were supposed to come in around 9 o'clock in the morning, and they arrived at our house about 4 o'clock in the afternoon. Somebody was delivering a load of potatoes, gave them a ride, and knew we were in a new section of Lakewood, and brought them to the house.
Well, that's quite a story. Glad we got that.
I remember my mother looking in the, what do you call it, the lists of people who were killed,
Oh,
because she had a brother up in Canada in the service. she used to look in the Canadian. We weren't in the war then.
Uh-huh.
I remember when we went to Cleveland, the kids, at the
Yeah.
election of Wilson, they used to taunt us and say, Wilson was going to keep us out of war. And we didn't get in.
Uh-huh.
That's all I remember. And of course the armistice. Because the flu knocked everything out of our minds.
Uh-huh.
We used to wear little bags.
Something.
Sulfur or something, we used to wear them to keep the flu away.
Now, what are your memories of the 1920s?
Well, I came up to
We
Brookline,
were still, we come up from Canada.
and I came up on the train, and my mother was working up in Newton Center, and I went to her, and I stayed there for a little while till we read all the ads in the paper for Mother's Helpers, and she thought Brookline High was a good place to go. So we found one, and I went to live with a family by the name of Brown on Vernon Street in Brookline. And Mr. Brown was a haberdasher, and he had the Enterprise Haberdashery in Boston. It was on School Street, as I remember. I think they had two of them, but I remember the one on School Street. And I went right into Brookline High, and I was there about 2.5 years, and we had some sort of a falling out. I don't know just what it was now, but my mother said that I shouldn't stay there any longer, and I went to work for a family called by the name of Guest, Guest. They lived on, no, wasn't yours was,
Oh, it might.
I can't think of the name of it now. I will in a minute, because there's a nursing home there that we visited. Gardner Road, up in back of the high school. And I was there for the rest of the time. I graduated from high school in 1925. And in the fall, I went into Massachusetts General to train for a nurse. And I was there about 6 months. I was just about going to be capped. And my mother had finally worn herself out. And she wasn't feeling well and stayed with a cousin in Cambridge. So I came out of the hospital and I stayed with her. I did odd jobs over there. They used to keep college students. That was before all the dormitories were built at Harvard. This was 1925, 26. And I used to go and make beds and dust and things like that. I earned some money. And my mother stayed with my cousin. And she didn't feel better. And so she finally put herself together, and we came to Newton and got a little house apartment together.
And then what did you do next?
I had a job. I went to work for the Carter's Ink Company, and I worked for them for 46 years.
What did you do for
Everything. I worked in the accounting. I worked in the foreign. I worked in the credit. I worked in the purchasing. I was assistant purchasing that was during the Second World War, when in order to get a raise you had to have a new title. And then I worked in the sales. and I had charge of the adjustments, that is, giving credits for different things. And I was there 46 years.
I hope each of those changes meant a raise.
Well, sometimes they did. But they put me where they needed somebody, I guess. And my sister worked for 43 years as a stenographer, typist, ediphone operator, and I would have gone crazy.
We're altogether different.
Altogether different. She's the quiet, scared one, and I never could sit still so long.
Put up with my boss.
No.
What was the impact of the Depression on your family? What did you do differently?
We were always depressed.
We always were poor, because my father, of course, being gone, and my mother only able to earn so much, and I started at $15 a week. That was in 1926. And we were always poor. It didn't make much difference to us, and everybody else around was in the same boat, so that we didn't feel different.
What was the reaction to your family, to your neighbors and friends, to Franklin Delano Roosevelt?
Well, a lot of people thought that he was wonderful. I didn't, or my family didn't, because they were Republicans. Although during Wilson's time, they were a Wilson Democrat, if you could call it that. But I think that they had that from my mother's people in New Brunswick were what do they call it in Canada? Not Republicans. Conservatives.
Liberal.
They were liberals. They're liberals and conservatives. And my mother's family were always conservatives, and so I suppose that came over and made us more Republicans than Democrats. And I could never understand how he could leave the state of New York in such poor condition and then go on to be a wonderful president. But he did, of course, he adapted a lot of good things. He adapted the Social Security, which he took from Dr. Townsend. And when my brother was in high school, he was a Townsend Club member. We never were. And but he was. And he had the idea, Townsend did, that if every older person had $200 a month, that it would help the economy and all that. And Roosevelt adapted that into the Social Security.
We're all grateful for that.
Oh, you bet. Right now.
Keeping us going.
Was there anyone in your family who was active in politics?
No, we always were voters, and we supported everything that came along. We were interested in politics. I can remember one time my mother had, in the last 10 years of her life, she had 4 major operations, and she was recuperating from an operation. And who was running then? Was it Eisenhower? Eisenhower. And I can see in our house up on Church Street, this table was a dining room table, still is, but it's in the kitchen. And my mother standing at the end of the table, and saying, "Oh, wonderful, wonderful." We were listening to the radio, and she was so glad that Eisenhower
He
was
made
up.
us sweep.
Made us sweep. I said, "You get back to bed. You're going to be sick." But she said, "Isn't that wonderful that she was dead?" So we always were very interested in politics.
So you voted.
Oh, yes,
Uh-huh.
definitely.
Uh-huh.
And I worked at the polls, counting ballots, something we did for the veterans during the Second World War. And I remember being down in the library, and we were mailing out things for something for the veterans. I don't know. Maybe they were the ballots.
Maybe.
And it was in charge of a man, the man that lived up there on the corner of Elizabeth Street. You know, Harriet.
Oh, yes, yes.
Her father. Well, her father had charge of it, and I've forgotten what his name was.
I remember being
And so after that, we worked on that, and he asked me if I would be interested in working at the polls for counting the ballots. He counted them all by hand, all this. We worked from 8 o'clock the polls closed, so we go at 8 o'clock at the old fire station over on Washington Street, and I'd get through at 3 o'clock in the morning, go home, and my feet would not even get warm, and I had to get up and go to work the next day. But I think we received $6 for that or
That meant
something.
a lot.
And that meant a lot in those days.
I think I did a bunch.
Did you? Oh, I did it 2 or 3 elections.
Well, that's interesting because I was going to ask you if there was an impact of World War II.
Yes.
Do you remember any of the rationing or any of these?
Oh, yes. We have our rationing books.
Oh, do you?
I found them. I was looking for something the other day. Yes, we have our rationing books. And my brother was drafted. Charles was drafted. But he did not go overseas because he had polio when he was 4 years old. And it didn't leave him lame, but if he was tired, he would drag one foot. And they said that if he was on a march, that his leg would give out.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
So he worked in the commissary or something, I know, in a store that they had. He was down in Lexington, Kentucky, I think. And so when he came home and did get married, he had a chance at the houses that they had at Oak Hill Park.
So he was in the Army.
Yes,
Mm-hmm,
yeah.
mm-hmm.
He's buried up at Newton Cemetery, and it has a thingamajig. He could have been buried down at Bourne, but for no charge.
White people.
But I said no, because I said, "You never get down there." And so he's buried up at Newton Cemetery, but he is a veteran. He was.
Could you tell me anything about the Carter Ink Company? How did that business relate to changes in Newton?
Well, Richard Carter was a Newton man.
He was.
Yes. And it was in Cambridge on First Street. It didn't have anything to do with Newton per se, except that he did live in Newton. And I think he was a good citizen of Newton. That's all I know. But I knew him. He was still living when I first went to work. I can't remember when he died, but I know it was maybe about 15 or 20 years after I went there to work, because I went to his funeral. He belonged to the church up there.
New Jerusalem.
Yeah, Church of the New Jerusalem. And we went to the funeral. I can remember that. But I don't think it had anything to do with Newton, except that I think he was a good citizen, maybe on some boards and things like that.
Mm-hmm.
But as I say, we didn't pay much attention to these things when we were younger.
Oh, I know. Well, you worked for quite a period of time. Did you see a change in the attitude of people generally about women working from the time you started?
Well, when I first went to work at Carter's, married women could not work.
Oh, really?
If you were married, you had to leave.
Uh-huh.
And that was the way it was.
I don't think it ever changed, did it?
I don't know.
The new laws hadn't come in.
No, the new laws hadn't come in.
For
But
women.
I retired in 72. And
Excuse me, but you mean in 1970 there still were no married women working there?
oh yes, there were, Helen. Oh yes, sure. Mary, who's this that worked back of me? Oh yes, no. They had to change with the times.
Mm-hmm.
But when I first went there in 1926, they didn't allow married women.
Mm-hmm.
And we noticed quite a change in the people coming in to work. I mean, we had to have a job. We had to work. And no matter what they said or did, we took it. But when, within about 20, 25 years, all they were interested in when they were going to get their vacation, when they get their coffee breaks. We never knew of such a thing as a coffee break.
Uh-huh, uh-huh.
No, you had to go visit the toilet, you went, and then that was it. I mean, no time allowed for it. We had lunch time, and that was it. But,
Would the coffee break have come in after World War II?
I think it came in before that.
Uh-huh.
Yeah, I think it came in before that.
Uh-huh, uh-huh.
But we didn't drink coffee except for breakfast, and it didn't bother us.
Uh-huh, uh-huh. Have you had time to belong to any organizations? You mentioned working for the church.
Mm.
Is there a women's group in that?
Oh
or
yes, I
something?
have charge of it at the present time.
What is the name of that?
The Women's Association.
Women's Association.
Yeah. And we meet once a month. And I belong to Church Women United. And I have charge of getting one program a year for them. And I go to the board meetings and other things. I sing in the choir. I still sing in the choir. And I'm on the stewardship commission of the church. I'm assistant treasurer. Have charge of the memorial funds.
And that organization was for Virginia.
Oh yes,
Robbins.
and I'm on the advisory board of the Congregate Living with Virginia Robinson.
Oh.
All church related.
Very interesting. Now, what is the function of the Women's Association? Do they have particular things that they do?
We meet once a month and have a social time, and then we have a speaker. We have different things, usually church related, if I can get somebody that doesn't charge for it. And it is we don't do anything special except that we're the backbone of the church.
I can believe it.
Yeah.
We would usually do a lot of work.
We work on fairs, and we give some money to the church, and we give money to things that we're interested in,
Uh-huh.
like the Newton Wellesley Hospital chaplaincy,
Uh-huh.
and City Mission, and
Guild for the Blind.
Guild for the Blind,
Different things.
and a lot lot of other things. We give our money to those kind of things.
To charitable organizations. Now, what is this congregate housing?
Well, that, you know where the congregate house is, up on Newtonville Avenue.
Oh, I've heard that there was one there.
And there's going to be one over at St. Jean's School.
I know where
Another
St.
one.
Jean's School
That,
is.
the congregate house is different people of different ages that they share the kitchen. They have their own room and bath, and they just live together, and they just don't want to keep up their own big house or something like that. And they're not ready for nursing homes or anything like that. They are able to get around, and some of them have their own cars and things like that. And that, Virginia Robinson, that's the name of the house. They named it for her. And they have meetings, and we did a survey for the city of Newton on what people want for housing. They visited, interviewed 500 people, and I worked on that. I didn't do any interviewing. They had a team from Boston University, trained interviewers, and this was in connection with them that we did it. And we went in there and we called people to see if they would be willing to be interviewed, men and women alike, and over 55.
I was going to ask about the requirements. There's an age requirement.
Yes, over 55.
Is there a income requirement? Do they have to have?
No. No, I don't think that I don't know whether they did or not. That was up to the interviewers. We just had to call and find out if they would be willing to be interviewed. And
Are there both men and women in the house?
Mm-hmm. Yes.
That's a very worthwhile thing to do.
Yeah. So I guess that's about all I do.
Well, that sounds like a lot. Would you want to comment on any changes that you have noticed through the years in where you shop, in the shopping areas? I presume there were not supermarkets in 1926.
No, 1926, the Hoods had a small store down under where we lived. And when we first went there, believe it or not, there were 2 ice cream stores at Newton Corner. Rollins and Randall's. One on one side of the street, a little further up, and they sold ice cream and chocolates, candy. And there was a nice bakery across the street from us. It was called the Vendome. And this is 1926, 27, 28. I don't know how long it lasted. The people's name that ran it was, I didn't have it, but now one of the blue girls married one of the boys, I remember.
I've forgotten.
Oh, I can't think of it now. But my mother used to get her beans ready. Of course, Saturday night was bean night. And get her beans ready and send them over in the pot to the Vendome Bakery, and they were baked for all day in their big ovens for 25 cents.
Oh, that's a great story.
And my mother always made bread that Saturday, so we had fresh rolls and beans for. We would have shopped for clothing either at Cronin's in Waltham or at R.H. White, Jordan, Gilchrist,
They're all
Let
gone.
me see, what was the other one that my grandmother used to come into? Houghton and Dutton. All in Boston. And you see, we worked in Cambridge, and all we had to do was come across the bridge and walk down Charles Street, and the stores were there.
Uh-huh, uh-huh.
And we had to work on Saturdays in those days. So we'd get through at 12 o'clock. And then if we had errands to do, we'd come into Boston and do an errand.
We used to go to Central Square, too.
And yes, and we used to go to Central Square
Nice stores.
from Kendall Square where we worked.
Uh-huh. Well, how did you travel? How did you
Streetcar.
get by streetcar?
Train, underground train.
Uh-huh. And to Grover Cronin's there was a streetcar?
No,
No, buses.
I think it was a bus.
Uh-huh, uh-huh.
We didn't very often go there. We mostly went to Boston. And the streetcars ran from Watertown Square. At one time there was a streetcar that ran from Watertown Square through Central Square, through Kendall Square, over to Bowdoin Square in Boston. And that cost us from Watertown Square 10 cents.
That was a long ride.
Was that still operating?
Yeah, we went on it, and we'd go to Central Square, and then go down the subway, and go to Kendall, and then there'd be a bus that would go down on First Street, or another bus that went across the bridge, the Longfellow Bridge, to Bowdoin Square.
Well, now, do you have a car?
No,
Did you ever?
never
Did you-
had
I
one.
wondered if you ever had a car.
Never had a car.
Well, how do you get to church on Sunday?
I'll walk across the street.
Oh, that's right.
Elliot.
That's right. You're right at County Corner. That's convenient.
How long have you lived in Newton?
Since 1951. And so I know where
Yeah.
church is. For the moment, I just...
And now we have two good friends that take us shopping. We usually go to Star Market or Purity Supreme. We can walk up to Purity Supreme and take the bus back, or take the bus up and walk back. That isn't too far.
But you want to take the bus back because of the groceries. You
No,
don't
we usually,
It's hard to depend. We know when they go.
but we don't know when they come back.
You may just miss
Oh, we're
one,
just
wait a half
for
hour.
just for a couple of items, not for big shopping.
Just certain things we'll see advertised or something. I know people always say we should ride back, but you can't, you don't know the time. Here they leave on the hour or the half hour, so we always know when they're going. But we're not sure when they come back.
Well, your doctor probably thinks it's good for you to walk anyway.
Oh, yes.
We always walk.
We always have, because we didn't have a car.
We walked up there from Linda Terrace.
Well, now, you remember when the Turnpike came
Oh,
through.
Yes.
And I would like you to tell a little about that.
Well, they talked about the Turnpike coming for, 3 or 4 years before they actually did anything about it. And it bothered my mother very much, because she knew that the house would go and rents would be higher, and how could we swing it? Well, she died before it was finished, open, and the house went. And so she didn't have to worry about that. But it was a worry for the older people especially. And of course,
those that own their house.
yes, and the people that own their houses, it wasn't so bad for them because they were paid for their houses.
Yes.
But the people who were living as renters weren't paid. They had to find somewhere else, and some of the people went out to Magic. Lily Jefferson was talking to the forum at our church Sunday, and this is they're having a whole month of different speakers about
Racism.
racism in Newton. And so she was saying that people from up her way, especially black people, some of them went to Natick, and some went to Brighton, and some went other places in Newton if they could afford the housing. But the housing is expensive in Newton, and that's why so many of them left. Our landlord, when the house went, he bought a house in Millis, but he was paid for his house, so he could do that. And the people down the street, some of them went down on the Cape, and the people next door were smart enough to buy a house before this came, and they came down on Church Street further down, and some of the other people went to New Hampshire, and of course across the street was the Y, so there were no houses over there, so I don't know about them. But there was a lot of houses went from Church Street, that end of it. I think they said about 400 houses went from Newton.
I don't remember how many, but there were a lot. And of course it took the part of the property in front of several of the churches.
Yes.
Methodist Church in Auburndale, Methodist Church in Newtonville,
Yeah.
front of the library, and it did make a difference in
Oh, it split the Newton corner.
and West Newton and Auburndale and so forth. That was
Made quite a difference at Newton corner.
Have you noticed the difference in housing around Newton with fewer family houses and more apartments and condominiums?
Well, I don't know where the condominiums are, but there are quite a few. Well, there are still quite a few private homes in Newton Corner.
Yes.
And of course, a lot of them were so large that people were having apartments in them. And I think that there still are a lot of houses that have apartments. Now, if they have a back door and a front door so that people can have, double ways out, or over here on Wesley Street, there's one with an outside stairway going up. If they do that, why, I guess the apartments are fine. But they have to have certain rules and regulations for them. There are quite a few. There have been some new ones built down on Park Street. There were 2 new ones built there. But there hasn't been too much building at Newton Corner.
It was pretty well built up before, so the land is taken. Have the things that have changed in Newton been ones which have been good for you? Have they made much changes in your life?
No, I don't think they've bothered us, except that we had to move. And
that was Linden Street. You had to move
Linder
from.
Terrace.
Linden Terrace.
Linder.
Linder. I'm glad
Linder
you.
Terrace.
Thank you.
And we moved from there the 31st of May on 1987. No, 86. 1986. Yeah, that'll be 2 years. And that was an upheaval because we had to pay more rent and we had to pay for moving and all that. Except the church people came in and moved us. I hired a truck from U-Haul, and the church people came in and moved us and set us right up.
Wonderful. But now, that wasn't for the Turnpike in 86.
Oh, no.
No. Where was it that you had to move because of the Turnpike?
Across from the Y on Church Street.
On Church Street,
Yeah.
right, good.
So Linda. And we went to Linda from there, and then we came from Linda to here.
Yes,
So
okay.
we're back on the same street that we started on.
Good, good.
And now, do you want to know anything?
Please turn tape over to count of about 60. Thank you. I understand that you have some memories of the house that's now called the Jackson Homestead,
That's right.
and we'd like to hear about that.
In 1926, when let me see, 1926, my mother went to live at the Jackson Homestead with the Keith family, Keith. Mr. Keith was a coal dealer in Newtonville. That's when they had coal. And there were 3 children in that family. He was a widower. And there was 2 daughters and a son. The son's name was Jackson Keith. And I don't know what the 2 girls, I can't remember. Barbara was the older girl, and she was a librarian. And I can't think what the middle girl was, but she was married. Was she Mrs. Kingsbury?
Yeah.
She was Mrs. Kingsbury. So my mother went there to work with William, and we were down in Brookline going to high school, and then I went from there to the hospital. So when I was in the hospital training for that 6 months, I used to come out and spend the night with my mother when I had that time off. And she was what they called a working housekeeper. She'd give them a couple of days a week, and then she'd go out and work for other people. And that's all I can remember about it, except that I used to sleep there maybe a couple of times in the winter when I was in training.
Well, that's great fun. We're delighted to have that. Now that Mr. Keith must have had a relationship with the Jackson family.
I think his wife was related to the Jacksons, and I don't know whether they paid me rent or anything, but they were sort of caretakers and lived there. And I wouldn't want it to go in the record, but
Do you want me to turn this off?
Yeah.
I wanted to ask if you had any special moments or special experiences in your life that you would like to talk about.
No, I think that traveling has been wonderful, and that's about all. It's been hard work. We worked long years, and but I don't think there's anything.
You traveled, did you say?
Oh yes, we've traveled a lot.
Where have you
The
been?
United States, Alaska, Canada, England. I've been in London 5-6 times, and Scotland, and I went to the Passion Play in 1970, so we had 7 countries that we touched. Germany. We had a nephew in Germany, and we went over to visit him there. And we went to the last 2 trips have been to England or Scotland, where we're interested in where John Eliot came from. he lived in a small village, Little Bordeaux, in England, and they wrote to Boston and to the Congregational House and asked if anybody here was interested in John Eliot. Well, they sent it out to the letter out to our church. So Helen and I were in London, and we went and visited the Reverend Derek Collingswood, who was interested in John Eliot because he lived there with Thomas Hooker in Little Bordeaux. When Henry wouldn't let them preach because they were Covenanters and not preaching his kind of stuff. So they came. Thomas Hooker went to Holland for 2 or 3 years, and the children were growing up Dutch, and they didn't like that. So they came to Boston. Hooker went to Connecticut, founded the Center Church in Hartford 350-odd years ago, and helped write their Constitution for the state of Connecticut. John Eliot came to Boston, and he founded the church over in Roxbury, the Eliot Church, and he was a missionary to the Indians. He worked right up here in back of Farlow Hill, and he also worked in South Natick with the Indians. And when we came to name our church in, I guess it was 1845 or some year like that, we had the first congregational and the second congregational, we called it the Eliot Church. And Jackson, Deacon Jackson, was one of the founders of our church. And we've always been close to the Jackson Homestead and the Jackson people. And so they invited some of us over to England for a little tour, 5 days, to stay with people in the town. And 3 went from Eliot Church: Virginia Weber, who used to work at the library, and Helen and I. And we had a wonderful time. So that was in 1986. Well, 1987, they said, we're coming over to visit you. And the 1st of October, we had 18 or 19 of them here. We had to house them and feed them and see that they went different places of interest. And who did it? Me. I had charge of the whole shooting match, and we gave them a wonderful time, and they appreciated it ever so much. And they went to Plymouth Plantation, they went through Harvard, and they went to the Roxbury Latin School, which John Eliot founded in 1645. And it's the longest continuing private school in the United States. They visited there. The headmaster put on a wonderful tea and took them around and showed them all around the school. And they went on a walking tour of Boston. The Reverend Joe Bassett took us on that. He's a minister in Chestnut Hill. He's a minister in Chestnut Hill. And where else did they go? Well, they had a dinner for them up at here in Newton, up at the French caterers on Center Street. Oh, I can't think of the name. Helen, what's the name of the people that put on the dinner for the English people.
Joan and Peter.
Spackman. The Spackmans. They put on a beautiful, for 36 people. We were invited too. And had a lovely evening there. And then they left from here and went up to Vermont, and then they went to Connecticut. And they came back here on the 12th of October, and J. Merrill and I met them in town and took them to Faneuil Hall and all around the different shops. They were all open. The stores were closed, but the shops were open and the eating places. And we spent a couple of hours, and then they went off to England that evening. There were British people. There were Welsh and Scotch and English.
Well, that was a very special thing.
It was wonderful.
That was very special.
And I practically went to pieces after that. I was so tired.
Exhausted.
But, exhausted, because we gave them
Three thunderous straight.
3 meals I had to handle all the money, all the stuff.
Take the bus.
That was a big job.
Are you still recording?
So,
Yes, I
okay,
am.
that's enough.
Well, tell me when you're through. I'll show you this.
I want to
Don't tell
thank
me
you.
here.
Well, that's all right. I want to thank you very much for doing this for the library and for the homestead. And for me personally, I want to say it's been a great pleasure to get to know you and to hear your stories. Thank you.